is a political commentator and the host of the podcast 20 Questions With. So we have 4 podcasters, with Christabel being the odd one out, but it's only a matter of time, I'm sure, Christabel. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to ask our panel a question. You can WhatsApp us on that number, you can text 84850, and of course you can watch us on Global Player.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, Birmingham City Council's urging striking bin workers to reconsider what it calls a very, very fair
To Tuesday's cross question, the number to call if you'd like to put a question to our panel is 08. No, that was what the number was back in about 2010. 0345 6060 973. On the panel tonight, Charlotte Pickles, Director of the Public Services Focused Think Tank Reform, which is in no way related to Reform UK. Shall we get that out of the way right at the beginning? Christabel Cooper is Director of Research at the think tank Labour Together, which is separate from the Labour Party. We should make that clear as well. Sarah Southern is a political commentator and co-host of the podcast Opposition Cast. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And Matt Stadlen, political commentator, who's the host of the podcast 20 Questions With. 0345 6060 973. We can take calls, we can take WhatsApp messages, you can text 84850, and you can watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Let's go straight to a text question from Scott in West Hampstead, who says, in the UK, some occupations are legally prohibited from striking, including the police, prison officers and members of the armed forces. Should bin men and women also be subject to no strike agreements, given the importance of their jobs and the public health requirements of keeping the streets clean and free of the spread of disease? Matt Stadlen.
Well, it's tricky, isn't it? Because I'm tempted to say yes, but nurses can go on strike. We saw a major nurses strike in the dying days of the Tory government. Doctors can go on strike. So it's tricky to suggest that bin men and women should not be able to, if that's the right terminology, by the way, for them. But stepping back from it, I'm absolutely appalled by the scenes that we have seen in Birmingham. It is totally unacceptable. And I was pleased to see a Labour minister on the news rounds this morning using that phrase as well, totally unacceptable. The problem for her and for Keir Starmer is that it's now on their watch. And ultimately, if you've got a public health crisis where you have rats running rampant in streets where children live, then you've got to sort it out.
How do you think they should sort it out?
Do you know what? And this is the privilege of sitting here and not in government. I don't really care, Ian. I just want it sorted out.
You see, I suggested, because we did this in the last hour, I suggested that Angela Rayner should go up there and sort it out, because I think she's actually capable of doing it. She was a union negotiator in a previous life, and you can imagine her sort of rolling up, sitting down, saying, right, I'm going to stay here until you lot sort this out. Get on with it then. I mean,
and yet what we're hearing from Unite is that the Labour government doesn't seem to understand what the issues are, and if that's true, that's very concerning. But I've met Angela Rayner a couple of times. I think she's a very competent operator, and she's charismatic. And I agree that if anyone in the Labour government can sort it out, she has a good chance. John Prescott would have been good at it.
Well, she sort of is to Keir Starmer what Prescott is to Blair. I know that's almost a lazy analogy, but I think there is something in that. Charlotte Pickles.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think let's send Angela Rayner to sort out all problems across the country. I think that's genius. Look,
any time.
Literally everything. I mean, are you going to argue with her? I mean, definitely get her out there. Look, I think the thing that I find really difficult about the bin strike is that you've got such different information put out from both sides. So like the council saying this is 17 people, what the hell are you doing holding us, hostage? And then you've got Unite saying no, this is 170 odd people, the numbers are different. Who the hell knows what's actually going on?
Well, I think we actually got to the bottom of that in the last hour, because we had someone from Birmingham Live, and I said, look, I don't know what the right answer is here. Is it 17 or is it 170? So she took me through the whole thing, and it originally was 170. But they've got it down to 17 because all the other people, they've either accepted voluntary redundancy or they've renegotiated, they've taken other jobs within the council. But it's 17 that haven't come to any agreements.
In which case, this is ludicrous that the thousands of people in Birmingham are, as has already been said, their health is being put at risk. Presumably kids aren't able to go and play outside. This is absolutely ludicrous that Unite are holding out. And you can understand actually now why Labour is furious with them over that.
And it's mainly in what I would say the most Labour voting bits of Birmingham.
And not just that, right? But let's be clear here, Birmingham Council is bankrupt. I mean, they had the equal pay claim, which they're also incidentally saying this may be in breach of if they keep this role that they've got rid of. Like, there's no money and you're creating such harm to the local population for 17 people. I mean, that's just mad, isn't it? So, I mean, it's not answering the caller's original question, which is should they be able to strike? But on this basis, should they be striking, whether they're able to or not? My answer would be hell no.
Which isn't to say, by the way, that it's not tough on those people who, according to Unite, are going to lose £8,000, a third of their salary, because it absolutely is. The problem is that there are millions of people across the country who are struggling to make ends meet.
But also those 17 people could have accepted what the remaining, we're not going to try live on air to minus 17 from 170, that's embarrassing.
You run a think tank,
no,
Charlotte,
I know,
honestly.
But anyone will tell you numbers is not my strong point. Apart from if you want to know some stats, I can tell you that.
OK, Christabel.
So I was a councillor not so long ago, and when I started, one of my first meetings was with the Director of Finance. And I came away actually in awe of how anyone manages council finances at the moment. Obviously, there are particular problems in Birmingham due to this very long-running issue over equal pay that has bedevilled, I think, both Conservative and Labour administrations in the council. But councils have seen their budgets cut. I mean, what I hadn't realised before becoming a councillor was actually how much money comes from central government. I suppose I'd sort of assumed that it all comes from council.
75%.
Yeah, exactly. So when that is cut by 50%, councils just are really, really struggling to provide basic services. And that's why you've seen quite a few councils, a lot of them are bad decisions that have been made by administrations. But councils up and down the country are really struggling with their finances. And so, you can understand that this comes along. And, if it really is just 17 people, it does seem a bit ridiculous that when councils are just facing real pressures just to deliver the statutory services that they're legally obliged to, that they're being held to ransom like this.
Sarah.
I guess bin collection is one of the most universal services of a council. If a school goes on strike, it has no impact on me. If the librarian workers go on strike, again, zero impact on my daily life. But if the bin people go on strike, it impacts everyone. You'll remember when we were in Edinburgh in 2022 and there's a bin strike there.
Yeah,
it was
awful.
Disgusting. Like walking down the street, as a visitor to the city, it's deeply unpleasant. So I do think there is something about when it begins to hit universal impact and also really hits the health and well-being of people. I mean, the footage that we've seen of some of those streets, you feel so sad for those people in Birmingham who are just seeing writhing rats scuttling around right outside their front door. No one should be living like that in 2025.
But I think part of the issue is that it's the poorer areas where this is happening, where there's terraced houses, where you haven't got a big garden where you could store your rubbish if you needed to. And the more leafy areas, I mean, I'm not saying they're unaffected, but I mean, you've got the real example of the social divide there.
Absolutely. And I think there was some footage I saw last week where they went to a slightly wealthier part and there was no rubbish there. And I did also think, well, if you've got like a big Volvo, you can shove your rubbish in that and pop down to the tip. You can deal with it. Whereas if you don't have a car or, you are crammed, as you say, in a terraced street, that is what your neighbour does is immediately going to impact you. Even if you're managing it well, it's going to be so disruptive to you, your family, everyone around you.
There are people getting on buses at the moment, I think, going to their elderly mother's house to pick up rubbish and then take it to the tip. So you're absolutely right. It's much tougher in poor areas. And in richer areas, of course, they can pay independent contractors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so people are commissioning private trucks to come and collect their rubbish. Well, that's not something that's available to all, is it?
And also, you've got foreign television crews filming all of this. I mean, America, I think I read somewhere Birmingham, Alabama, was their local TV was carrying stories about what it's like in this third world city in England.
And it just adds to the whole, no-go zones and this whole weird perception that a chunk of America has of what's going on here. So, I mean, Birmingham is our second city. It's clearly,
Not if you live in Manchester.
Do you know what? And I did live in Manchester and I adore Manchester, and it's it's no disrespect to Manchester, but Birmingham, size-wise, is our second city.
By population, it is.
Exactly.
But I'm going to get hated for this, but Birmingham has never punched its weight, has it? In terms
Hang on a second.
No, seriously.
It's got brilliant schools.
I'm not
it's
saying...
got amazing football
I'm
clubs. Just because you're a West Ham fan and you're jealous of Aston Villa.
It's got one great football club.
Controversial. I hope you haven't got any Birmingham City fans listening.
Well, we probably have, and I'm trying to dig myself out of this hole.
They've just been promoted to the Championship, haven't they?
Yeah, okay. Yes, they have. But Manchester as a city, in terms of PR and how it projects itself, I would say has outranked Birmingham for a decade at least.
I think that's absolutely right. And, we can all name lots of famous musicians, comedians, etc. from Manchester. Although I do think now we've got West Mids and we've got the kind of, the sort of the mayoral model. It feels like it's a bit
Where's
more
the mayor of the
identity.
West Midlands, though? Where's he been in all of this?
They kicked out Andy Street, who actually did have a bit of profile.
Yeah, but there's a new one. Do you know his name? I can't even remember his name. Richard something.
Yes,
Richard
I do.
Parker
Parker.
Corey.
There you go. Richard Parker, yeah. Yeah.
But where's he been in all of this?
Yeah, it's true.
What's the point of having a mayor?
Andy Burnham would be out there, absolutely front and centre.
Yeah.
You're just trying to get callers from Birmingham, Ian, to call in. Because
I'm not.
If I was a Brummie, I would be on the phone right now.
I've found that in this bin strike, Brummies have been very reticent to give their views on it. And I found that sort of a little bit surprising. But what about Sharon Graham's comments, the leader of Unite, saying, well, this could happen all up and down the country now? I mean, she's got the bit between her teeth on this, Christabel. I mean, the sort of Unite are trying to impose themselves.
Yes. I mean, clearly they are, but the problems are fairly specific to Birmingham in terms of that equal pay settlement, the amount of money that they had to pay out. And I would really hope that, just to your comments about how these strikes do affect poorer areas, I would hope that she would bear in mind that it is the sort of people that she is supposed to be representing who do end up being affected most by these by these strikes. It is the people at the bottom end of the pile who are most dependent on public services. So when those are removed, it is those people who are going to suffer the most. I'd just add on the sort of, what one does about this. I have a greyhound who loves chasing rats. So, I could lend him out. But for those who have neither a Volvo nor a greyhound, this is obviously a pretty awful situation to be in.
Politically, it is really, really dangerous for this Labour government because they got terrible flack in the right-wing press for dishing out pay rises, as the right-wing press would have put it, to public service workers.
Yeah.
And their argument is, well, we got the trains working again and so forth, and we have to have a functioning society if we're going to get anywhere near
I
long-term
would
growth.
love a train to be working. Where are you travelling?
Southeastern train's brilliant.
Really?
Yeah.
Avanti? What on
Oh,
earth?
well, no.
Yeah.
But the point I'm making is if these strikes, I don't think they will, famous last words, but if they were to catch fire, as it were, and they were to spread around the country, politically that is catastrophic for a government that is priding itself on sorting out industrial disputes.
I would say, though, that this is a very different dispute to the ones with healthcare workers, where, I know, you know, my job at Labour Together is to look at public opinion research, and the public were very much supportive of those health workers going on strike because they hadn't had pay rises for a very, very long time. That we were losing people from the NHS to jobs abroad. It was clearly impacting staffing and recruitment and retention. And I think people understood why they were going on strike, and I think they understood why Labour had to sort those things out with a fair pay rise. I think this is a pretty different situation.
I don't know what I've started here, but the texts are coming in. Nisha says, Manchester will always be the UK's fourth city, behind Glasgow, Birmingham, the second city, and it's finally getting recognition and in the investment that it needs. Manchester was a dump 20 years ago, and without their football teams and Oasis, that's their marketing done globally.
Big university
It's
town,
a point
Manchester.
of view. Stevie in Belfast is not impressed by our discussion. He says, listening to preening, comfortable, condescending politicians and journalists lecturing frontline public service workers is quite nauseating. I couldn't see you lot taking a massive pay cut. All you seem to get is pay rises. Well, how would you know, Stevie, of all of our personal circumstances and whether we've ever taken a pay cut or whether all we get is pay rises? I suggest that you don't know. Anyway, more questions to come in just a moment. 0345 6060 973. You're listening to LBC. It's 8:15.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
17 minutes past 8. We have 4 podcasters with us. 3 podcasters.
I don't have a podcast.
You don't have a podcast
Someone should
either.
give me a podcast, but I don't have one.
Well, it's easy to create one.
Yeah.
Maybe you two should do a joint one.
Maybe we should.
There are plenty of dual men podcasts.
Yeah.
Maybe there should be a
There you
dual
go.
women
You
one.
heard it here first.
Well, I'll take the 10%. Charlotte Pickles is from the Reform think tank. Christabel Cooper from Labour Together. Sarah Southern from the Opposition Cast podcast. And Matt Stadlen from the 20 Questions with podcast. Right, let's go to Terry in Goole, who says Nigel Farage says he wants to re-industrialise Britain and even chose not to criticise the Birmingham bin workers, unlike Labour. Is Reform now the party of the working class? Well, I've got to come to you, Christabel.
Well, certainly Nigel Farage has changed his tune on British Steel, and he was, he comes, in the end, Reform come from a Thatcherite tradition. They come from quite a right-wing part of the Conservative Party. And certainly in the past, he has opposed giving subsidies to British Steel. So it does seem a bit, it's very explicable. I was about to say odd, but it's very explicable what he's doing. He's realised that there are more voters who are economically left-wing than there are voters who are economically right-wing in Britain.
Is that right?
Yes, no, that is absolutely true. On the economic left-right axis, there are more people who, for example, believe in nationalising industries, who believe in redistribution of income, who would raise taxes in order to support public services. And I think what Nigel Farage has done is woken up to that fact and has realised that if he wants to take his party from only 14% vote share that he got at the general election, actually to being a mainstream party capable of challenging for government, he needs some new voters.
Well, he's leading the polls. He's above Labour at the moment.
Neck and neck in most polls. But I think the problem is that people do remember the things he said in the past. They remember what he said about privatising the NHS. And so I think that...
he's never advocated privatising
Well,
the
he's
NHS.
advocated changing the model of the NHS.
Is that a terrible thing to advocate? Reform in the NHS? Does that send you into outer oblivion?
Well, with the voters, it does. I mean, if you, again, what I do for a living is public opinion research. And if you suggest that to the average British voter, they will be very, very unhappy with you. So I think that what he's doing is he's trying fairly cynically to reposition reform in a place where he can get a larger vote share than he has done up to now. But I think, people remember there's enough, and the internet remembers what people have said about...
Tell me about it.
Yeah, well, exactly. So I think that he's going to be on sticky ground. I think that it's his coalition is quite a difficult one to hold together. So we'll see where he gets to with that.
Sarah Southern.
I think he probably is targeting working class people in a big way at the moment because he's seen the success that Boris Johnson had in 2019 with his... Is it a red wall? Is it a blue wall? I can never remember. Red wall strategy. And I think that there will be a lot of former Labour voters who perhaps aren't getting what they want from Keir Starmer. They're not feeling as though that's representing them. So I think they're kind of taking a bit of a punt. It is interesting to see the polls at the moment showing that Reform are doing well. But as with all polls, it's just a snapshot of the day. Doesn't mean it's the reality come election time. But I'm really intrigued to see... I've not gone through every single council to see how many Reform candidates there are, but I certainly know that they're fielding a lot of candidates.
They're fielding more candidates than any of the other parties.
Are they?
Yeah.
Wowzers, I'd not seen that yet. I'd be really intrigued then to see how their campaign actually goes. Have they actually got the volunteers out on the road to go and knock on the doors and mobilise these voters to actually go and vote them for Farage's party?
They're apparently modelling their campaigning structure on the Liberal Democrats. And of course the Liberal Democrats...
Oh, so is he just going to go to loads of roller coasters then? Are we going to see Nigel Farage on a paddleboard?
Oh, God help us all. Matt, take us away from that vision.
Nigel Farage, as we all know, is a very, very effective politician. And now that he's in Parliament, he's become even more effective. He's seen off the threat from Rupert Lowe in the Twitter wars, the social media wars. And I think Labour have to take him very, very seriously at the next election. What do I think of his politics? We've seen countless false messiahs for the working man and the working woman down the ages. And Nigel Farage is just such another. Who has ever, apart arguably from the very, very wealthy, ever benefited from the politics that Nigel espouses? Yes, Reform's fantasy manifesto at the last election was a mishmash of all sorts of policies, some of which appeared to favour working people, for example, trying to take the lowest paid people out of income tax altogether. I think they were going to introduce a £22,000 threshold or some such. But it didn't add up. And as far as I know, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, Reform voted against Labour's workers' rights reform bill. So if you're listening and you are a working class, traditionally working class person, and you think that Nigel Farage is going to reform this country, lead you out of relative poverty and make your life better, I can tell you right now, 4 years before it might happen, and it might happen, it's not going to work.
Charlotte.
I mean, yes, of course, Reform are going after working class voters. I mean, they're going after most voters, right? I mean, that's the whole point of being a political party, to get as many people as you can to support you. And, you know, the point about changing, you know, leopard changing your spots type thing is obviously valid. I'd probably also point out that Labour have got in and reversed a lot of their positions. So, you know, I don't think it's just Farage who's changed his view. A lot of promises that were made pre-election have been broken since by this government. But ultimately, there has been successive governments who have totally failed people living in communities where there's high levels of deprivation, where, you know, jobs have been lost, where, you know, there's a real sense of disenfranchisement, disillusionment, you know, a kind of sense that actually nothing's getting better and actually everything's getting worse. And so, you know, I would argue that actually it's the result of the failure of mainstream parties to have really delivered for working class people and to have made a difference to their lives, you know, to have failed to recognise that immigration has actually been a concern, to have failed to recognise actually the welfare state is fundamentally broken for most people, to have failed to recognise that actually, you know, in a lot of these communities, they feel like they've just been totally ignored while everybody else said, oh, globalisation is great and, you know, kind of our services model economy is great, etc. So, you know what, if people feel like Farage is speaking for them, then it's not really a surprise that they're going to say, well, nothing else has worked, so I'm going to vote for this guy. And look, absolutely right what everyone has said, you know, none of their policies add up. Like, the price tag on their last manifesto was the largest by far of anyone, totally undeliverable. But if it pushes the other parties towards actually starting to address seriously some of the issues that they've woefully failed to do over decades, then actually that's not a bad thing.
But Labour have recognised that immigration matters to people. They are trying to drive numbers down. And I suspect
largely
we'll
in
see
response
that,
to reform.
I suspect they'll see that next year and that we will see that. And
What's the evidence for that?
Well, they claim that they've been deporting more people than the Tories were deporting in recent years, just for example. And as I say, I suspect next time the immigration figures come out, they will be lower.
But the numbers that are coming over the channel are going up, not down.
That doesn't mean they don't fail to recognise that that's an issue for a lot of voters. The question is how they deal with it without, for example, trashing out responsibility to international law. It's a really difficult problem. Doesn't mean they don't take it seriously.
It is a difficult problem, but it's quite... I mean, Christabel, do you see any real, apart from the Rwanda scheme, do you see any real difference in Labour's approach to that now? Because, I mean, that's why Nigel Farage will constantly think that he can win.
Yeah, absolutely. I see a difference. I mean, under the last government, we had an absurd law which prevented the government from processing people's asylum claims, which meant that asylum seekers were permanently trapped in hotels. They were put in some of the poorest parts of the country, you know, and there was a fairly direct link between places where asylum seekers were placed in hotels and where riots broke out last summer. If you were sort of literally to create a policy that was designed to create social unrest, that would have been that policy. Those hotels are just by design in some of the poorest places in the country because that's where housing costs are lower. And meanwhile, the failed Rwanda scheme, which, I mean, I can't remember the figures off the top of my head of the amount of money that the last government spent on it without deporting a single person. There was no evidence that it was actually going to be a deterrent. To be honest, if crossing one of the world's busiest shipping lanes in a small dinghy, risking death, and tragically a lot of people do die making that crossing. If that was not a deterrent enough to people trying to get to England, then there's something like 0.01% chance of being sent to Rwanda certainly wasn't going to do that either. And I do think that one of the reasons that you saw nearly 1 in 4 Conservative 2019 voters switched to Reform at the last election was because they heard Rishi Sunak stand there and say, I'm going to stop the boats. They saw him say, we're going to bring migration down. Under his watch, net migration went up to record levels, and he didn't stop the boats. Right. And so, you know, I think if you're an average Reform voter... I see no
evidence that a Labour government is going to do any different. And that's where Farage, I think, could pull through the middle, where if the Conservative Party hasn't recovered by 2029, which it may well not have done, if Labour doesn't deliver on things like immigration, you can see that there'll be a lot of people who think, well, let's give him a chance then.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it should be a priority for Labour to make sure that the immigration system is fair, that it is controlled, that people, you know, the majority of people who do come by small boats are actually genuine asylum seekers. But the fact is, and again, you see it very clearly in public opinion, and it's not, people want to know who is coming into the country, and they have an absolute right to know who is coming into the country. At the moment, it is very uncontrolled. At the moment, people do, I think, viscerally feel on an island that when people arrive in small boats, that is a threat. And I think if Labour do not take that seriously and do not, impose a fairer and more controlled system, then I think we probably will electorally pay the price.
But do you, the other three of you, agree that there is a huge opportunity here for Nigel Farage if Labour doesn't deliver, not just on immigration, but on a lot of the other main pledges that they made? I
agree with the political analysis that we've heard, that if Labour aren't seen to get a grip, then they are in real electoral trouble. And that's why I said that Nigel Farage, it's not impossible that he could become Prime Minister. If you think that Reform and the Tories could quite conceivably win more seats between them than Labour, and if Labour are unable to form a coalition with the Liberal Democrats, and if Reform win more seats than the Tories, then Nigel Farage becomes Prime Minister at the head of a Reform and Conservative coalition, possibly with Robert Jenrick as his Deputy Prime Minister or his Home Secretary, heaven forbid. That is a perfectly plausible analysis. If you think that Keir Starmer turned round an 80-seat majority for Boris Johnson in the space of 5 years to win a far bigger majority than Boris Johnson had ever done, cleansed the party of Corbynism in such a short space of time. British politics is incredibly febrile. The only point I'm making is that I think Labour do understand that, and they do get that people have a problem with the number of people, legal and asylum seekers, or illegal, whatever language you want to use, coming to this country. They get it. Can they do something about it? We'll have to wait and see.
Dale has another explanation. He says Farage, unlike the other non-main party leaders, has a regular slot on LBC. Well, strangely, I can't remember the exact year that Nigel left us, but I think it was at least 6 years ago. So I'm not sure that could be regarded as an explanation. Now, Christabel, do you feel that I'm attacking you on this programme? Because somebody here says, Iain, you always attack the left-wing guest and defend any right-wing stance. Your bias is appalling. I don't...
No, I don't.
I don't recognise that. I'm sure I'm guilty of that in the past, but
I thought you'd take us all apart.
I think I can plead innocent on this particular occasion. Right, more to come on Cross Question. 0345 6060 973. Text 84850, and you can WhatsApp us on the phone number as well. It's 8:31. Daryl Jackson has the news headlines.
Birmingham City Council's urging striking bin workers to reconsider what it calls a very, very fair deal. Unite Union members who've been on strike for over a month rejected an offer yesterday. The White House says more than 15 countries are in talks with the US over deals on tariffs. Earlier, Vice President J.D. Vance said America's working very hard on negotiating a great deal with the UK. And victims of the Horizon IT scandal are being urged to take legal action against the government over compensation delays. Campaigner Sir Alan Bates suggested it'll take until 2027 to fully settle claims, something ministers dispute. LBC weather: rain across the west, moving northwards tonight, turning dry elsewhere, and a low of 2 degrees.
LBC Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060973.
It's 8:34 on LBC. Charlotte Pickles from the Reform think tank, and again, nothing to do with Reform UK. You're going to have to change your name, aren't you, really?
We are.
You are?
Yeah.
Well, come on, what's
I'm
it
not.
going to
I'm
be?
not live on air.
Yeah, go on.
Be a coup. No.
This would be great PR.
It would.
I'll come back when we're gonna
right,
announce
fine.
it. It's good as well. It's a good name.
Christabel Cooper is Director of Research at the think tank Labour Together. Sarah Southern is the co-host of the podcast Opposition Cast, and Matt Stadlen hosts the podcast 20 Questions with. Who's your latest victim?
Actually, it was Yasmin Alibi-Brown.
Oh,
who,
I must listen to that.
Like me, she is on the left, but she's much further to the left. So I was able to ask her lots of questions about immigration that people are concerned about and see what she had to say. It's interesting testing, as it were, in inverted commas, your own side and making them really fight for their supper.
Well, I know what I'm going to listen to on the train home tonight.
But I've got
very
10
good.
minutes left to edit, so it might not
Oh,
be
you haven't
up
put
by
it up
then,
yet?
not
Oh, for goodness sake. OK. Right. A text question from Sophie in Newmarket. Teachers are going to have a vote on whether to go on strike, again in capital letters, after all the COVID and then strike closures before. Do they actually care about my daughter's education? Well, delegates at the National Education Union's annual conference have voted in favour of balloting the union's wider membership about a walkout over the government's proposed 2.8% pay increase. Sarah, let's start with you.
I do feel sorry for kids who are of school age.
Just think of the children.
Just think of the children, but what a time they've had, having to learn with their parents peering over their shoulder over a computer, strikes and such like. I can't imagine it's been joyous. I thought that teachers had been given quite a good uplift in their salaries over the last couple of decades. And I guess we are running out of money, as has been shown by Birmingham Council going bankrupt. We can't just have everybody on strike. There's only so much money left in the pot. So where are we going to draw the line as to when people accept that's all we have at the moment?
But don't teachers deserve to be sort of appreciated more in this country?
Oh, absolutely, they sure do. I mean, I couldn't think of anything worse than having to spend the day with other people's children. It certainly doesn't appeal. But I do also think, obviously I've never been
Matt's making a mental note never to book you as a babysitter.
Yeah, please don't. Yeah, but I do have concern that we can't just constantly be striking and demanding more money. I just don't think at the moment there's enough money in the coffers, and I think things are going to get worse. Sometimes we all have to burden that.
Matt.
What this says to me, and this isn't just about teachers or people who collect the rubbish, very, very important job, as we're reminded at the moment, or indeed doctors or nurses, but every time these conversations happen, it begs the question, does our model work? Does it necessarily work the way that we do things in this country, and not just our country, other countries as well? Because the reason people are striking in many, many, many cases, not because they're greedy, but because they are really struggling to pay their bills, to feed their children. And so if you're a teacher, of course you've got a responsibility to the children you teach. And of course those children deserve an education. But what if you're a teacher who is literally struggling to put food on the table for their own children? People up and down the country are facing really, really challenging times. And we in the media, we go in and out of the story of the cost of living. And then quite understandably, we talk about everything else under the sun because there are a lot of important things to talk about. But the cost of living crisis doesn't go away. Yes, inflation is down, but think of where interest rates are. And things are still expensive compared to what they were in the shops.
But when inflation is, I think, 2.8% now, and that's the pay offer, it's going to be quite difficult to explain for somebody who's not getting a pay rise at all, who's not going on strike, as to why teachers are going on strike, despite the fact that if you actually look at the pay scales, if you start, the starting salary for a teacher now is £30,000 a year, which is only just below the average salary in the country. But the problem is that if you stay in the profession for 10 or 20 years, you don't go up enough. I mean, if you're in the same job for 20 years, you would expect then maybe to be on sort of 50 or 60,000, I think, at that. But they're not. I mean, they're probably like to be on 39, 42,000.
Look at the gap between average wages in this country. If you think about 30,000, just below, you said the national average wage, and then average for buying your own home. I mean, the gap is astronomical.
Yeah, and that's where, as you say, that the system is broken down. Christabel.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. I think I can very much understand why teachers would. I can understand why you would want to go on strike. Obviously, as a parent myself, I can understand the impact that it has on people's children. I mean, I would just say with regard to inflation, wages in general are going up, and public sector workers over the last 15 years have had a pretty raw deal in terms of uplift in pay. And eventually that, just sheer market economics kicks in and people start leaving professions where they're not paid properly. And, you can see that and the entire profession suffers because you start having less experienced people coming in. I mean, you see this in the NHS
and the police
as well.
Look at what happens with the police. You can build back the numbers, but you're building back people who aren't experienced.
Exactly. So, I mean, whatever the rights and wrongs of this particular dispute, if you pay people less than they can get doing something else, they will go and do that other thing. And in the end, that doesn't help any of us.
Charlotte.
So just very briefly on the point you made, Iain, about sort of, the starting salary is not actually that far off the average wage in the country. And should someone be able to double that in 20 years? I mean, the vast majority of people can't. No, if you're an office administrator, if you're, working as a cleaner, if you're in, retail on a shop floor or something, no, you're not going to be increasing your wages by anything close to that. If you're in teaching, you take on a head of subject, maybe you take on a head of year role, maybe you take on some additional stuff, you become a head teacher. There are routes to progress. There are routes to significantly higher salaries. So, actually, there is quite a lot of potential within teaching to increase your salary by taking on more responsibilities and seniority in the same way that works in every
But not
other
everyone wants to do that.
No.
Not everyone wants to be a deputy head or
and
head of
that's absolutely
department.
fine, but that will still apply to lots of other jobs which aren't happening to be public sector where you're able to strike.
But the problem with that is that teachers tend to have had pretty good degrees, so they could be going off to higher paid jobs, and we have to keep teachers in the profession.
But they also get thumping pensions.
They get thumping pensions. Actually, for some teachers, having the school holidays is quite helpful if they have caring responsibilities. Yes, there are lots of other things they have to do, like marking and things which they'll do in the evening. But actually, I don't think this is we put a lot of public sector workers as important jobs they do on pedestals, and we don't apply the same rules to lots of low-paid workers in the private sector. And you know what? A lot of those parents whose children will then not be able to go to school, and therefore they may have to take a day off work, will be earning far less than a teacher. Potentially multiple jobs, if you're on kind of like waged rather than salaried work, etc. You know what? We should actually think beyond this idea that public sector good, private sector bad. And just on the specific
Who thinks
question,
private sector bad, though?
Lots of people make this argument because we haven't talked about the fact that actually, there's lots of people working in the private sector on lower wages, on worse conditions, who are really struggling to make ends meet. No one else has mentioned that, Matt. So actually, I think it is really important that we reflect that. And there's lots of progression opportunity. That is not to say that, of course, we don't need to make sure that we're getting the best possible people into teaching. But as has already been pointed out, taxpayers, raise for the state a set amount of money. We currently are paying £105 billion just to pay our debt interest, right? Where is the money coming from? If the teachers strike, junior doctors have indicated they might strike again. We will probably have strikes in other parts of the public sector. Where does that money come from? It comes from, yes, lots of wealthy people paying taxes, but also a lot of low-income people paying taxes. And you have to make trade-offs and choices about where you spend your money. So do you want to raise teacher salary above inflation, or do you want to think about social care workers, for example, who are way worse paid?
Lazarus says, surely teachers do deserve more pay compared to MPs who were recently awarded a £5,000 a month pay rise. It's ridiculous. No, what's ridiculous, Lazarus, is your text, because it's completely inaccurate. MPs were ordered a 2.8% pay rise, exactly the same that teachers are being offered. Now, admittedly, that took them to about £94,000 a year, so we're not really comparing like with like, but it does annoy me when people say, well, MPs get more. They don't set their own salaries either, contrary to popular opinion. Right, we will move on to more questions in just a moment. It's 8:43.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
Charlotte Pickles, Christabel Cooper, Sarah Southern and Matt Stadlen here answering your questions. Stephen in East Grinstead says, is any price worth paying for a UK-US trade deal? Now, the US Vice President, J.D. Vance, has said that negotiators from both countries are working very hard on securing an agreement, adding that there's a good chance of one being reached. A beautiful agreement, a big agreement, that's on my words. Charlotte Pickles, how vital is this? And I mean, the question is a bit odd in the sense, is any price worth paying? Well, clearly no is the answer to that, but...
Clearly, as you say, no is the answer to any price whatsoever. I mean, what would that mean? I don't know, give away the northeast or something? I mean, I don't know what any price would be, but clearly not. But
Iain would give away Birmingham.
That's so untrue. You had to go there, didn't you?
Yeah, moving on. So no, not any price. But look, the kind of current trade wars are hugely damaging. I mean, the economic impact cannot be understated, and the people who will pay the greatest price are going to be people that we've actually talked to quite a lot about this evening, which are those who are on the lowest incomes, who are still struggling with the cost of living crisis that Matt rightly pointed out. We often don't talk about anymore, but people are really struggling to make ends meet, and it will hit them the hardest as the prices for basic goods go up because of the inflationary impact. Job losses as businesses suffer, etc. So clearly not any price, but I do think we have to be very serious about looking at what the trade-offs are that we might be willing to do. And actually, we were in a not great, but better position before the general tariffs were all lowered down to 10%. We would have got some of the displacement trade as a result of having a slightly lower level. I think if we could at least negotiate something marginally better, then that would absolutely be worth doing. But look, I mean, would you trust anything that's being said at the moment from either J.D. Vance or the president? I mean, they contradict themselves the whole time. So great if it is true that we're looking at potentially getting a deal, but I really wouldn't be holding my breath at this point.
Christabel.
So I think Keir Starmer is playing this one exactly right. I mean, we know that Trump is unpredictable, that he's volatile. We also know that he's definitely has problems with some particular countries that he seems to have it in for, but Britain doesn't seem to be one of those. So under those circumstances, I think Keir Starmer is absolutely right to at least try and leverage that to get a better deal for Britain. Now, whether that's possible or not, I don't know. But I mean, it seems kind of foolish not to try and leave that door open for as long as possible. But I mean, obviously, as Charlotte's just said, the answer is no. He can't negotiate a deal at any price. And so,
what would your red line be?
Well, so, I mean, I'm just talking on behalf of the British people. Their red lines would very much be, I mean, I know it's kind of a cliche to talk about it, but they really do not want the chlorinated chicken. They
don't have to buy it then, do they?
But they don't even want it on their shelves. They don't even...
Well, that's ridiculous.
But I mean, well, OK, but take it up with them because they really don't want, they don't want to have the hassle of going to the supermarket and thinking, do I want to buy this one? They actually just don't want to even be given the choice. They just don't want it on their shelves. And, neither do they sort of want interference in the NHS. So there is a lot of, and again, if you ask them whether they would rather move closer to America or to the EU, again they would answer the EU. So I think if Keir Starmer can manage to use his what seems to be a pretty good rapport with Trump to get a good deal for Britain out of America, then I think that's absolutely what he should be doing.
Sarah.
I think that whoever is doing our negotiations does deserve a gold star, as I can't imagine that they're having a wonderful time.
Peter Mandelson.
He can still have a gold star. But I was more thinking of the civil servants around rather than necessarily the star player. But I just think it must be hellish waking up every morning and being like, what on earth are we going to have to deal with today? What is it that we're going to have to give? But I totally agree. British people do not want to see food standards drop. Therefore, of course, they don't want to see chlorinated chicken.
We have chlorinated salads on sale in our supermarkets. Nobody bothers about that.
But you can also get lovely, fresh, British grown chickens in our
Fine,
supermarket.
then you have a chance to
then we
buy
get
it.
that. Yeah.
But who's been to America and eaten chicken?
Yeah, and
Me.
it doesn't taste particularly
And
nice.
I
love
think
it.
it's fantastic.
Some good southern fried chicken. It's so good, right? What's the issue?
I don't know what the issue.
It's
this
also a welfare
bemuses
issue for
me.
the chickens. It's the reason they have to be chlorinated because they're kept in really unsanitary conditions.
Yeah, it's the reason for the chlorination rather than people desiring chlorine in their food, isn't it? But it would be, I don't know where my red line is. I think I felt a little uncomfortable when Keir Starmer was handing out the invitation from the King for him to come over. I was like, oh God, we really are showing off our ankles early to America here. But I kind of feel as though that's how you need to deal with Trump. And I think that actually Keir Starmer is doing quite a good job with it. He seems to be managing it reasonably well. I am quite intrigued to see if this state visit happens and how over the top it actually is.
Matt.
Well, first of all, this is arguably the most volatile, unpredictable White House that we've ever seen, even more so than Trump's first term, although we haven't yet seen the firings and the resignations. But if you just contrast what Elon Musk, his buddy, I don't quite know who is whose puppet, but Elon Musk last year was claiming completely falsely that Starmer was complicit in the mass rape of Britain. And now Trump has got his deputy, Vance, to come out and say he's got a soft spot for Britain, which we sort of know is the case.
Well, he is half British. We should sometimes remember
his
that.
His mother comes from, is it the Central Hebrides or Outer Hebrides?
Somewhere up there.
And of course Starmer should play on that, because this is about our livelihoods. This is about our cost of living, the cost of food on the table and so forth. But it is immensely complicated to work out what our red lines should or shouldn't be. And as you say, there are civil servants working around the clock trying to work out precisely the answer to that question. And one of the biggest questions, which I think you brought up earlier, Christabel, is how do we manage to sync our need to be as close as possible with the EU without re-entering, although there are lots of people who would like to re-enter the EU, and at the same time be close to America. That is, I imagine, fiendishly difficult and way above my pay grade as a political commentator.
Right, let's move on to a really interesting question from Jack in Bolton, who says, this is the first time I've ever texted into a radio show. Well, I feel my work is done tonight, ladies and gentlemen. As a young person...
First-time texter.
Yeah. As a young person, it's getting harder and harder to feel that the government has any interest in me or my peers. How can we be convinced that there's a future for us in Britain? Well, we have probably one of our younger panels on tonight. I'm not going to ask each of your ages, but they're all in their 30s or 40s. I'm going to hazard a guess. Yeah, they're not denying that. Charlotte, let's start with you.
Oh, thanks.
I mean, this is, I think, one of the most difficult questions that anybody in politics has put to them, because the answer is almost impossible, isn't it? You know it when you feel that the country is on the right track, and at the moment, so many younger people do not feel that.
Absolutely. And, if you were someone, heading into university or just heading out of university to get a job, the labour market doesn't look great, job market doesn't look so good anymore. Goodness knows what it's going to look like, depending on where Trump goes with his trade wars. You're looking and thinking, I'm never going to be able to afford a house. Most people today still want to have children, but look and go, it's not going to be affordable to me. So, of course, this looks pretty bleak. I mean, I think what I would say, and it would be nice if we could finally get a government that would recognise that they're, and I'm sure a lot of listeners who will be irate at me saying this, but actually start to get a grip with how much money is going to pensioners and how little is going to those who are funding pensioner benefits at the moment. The triple lock should be scrapped. It's not sustainable. You could be investing far more in young people. But I do think there are a couple of good kind of promising things. So, the fact that this government is really trying to get serious about house building and bringing down the cost of houses. Now, I don't think they will hit the 1.5 million that they've promised to build, but actually, that's a really important thing for young people who are looking and thinking, I'm never going to be able to own my own home. And that feels like one of the basics of, can I live a decent life sort of thing. So I think that is promising. They are getting more serious around kind of infrastructure and, trying to get the economy moving in that way. But look, I'd love to be able to give a long list of things which I think should make the first-time texter feel more optimistic. But I think this is a really tricky period. I think it's hard to see how we will come out of this era of crisis. But this is going to sound so terribly saccharine, so I apologise for it. But, his generation and those young people are the future of this country. And if they're not going to stay and they're not going to, want to be part of trying to rebuild it, then we're going to be in a far worse place.
Matt?
Well, yeah, we don't want to be in a position where instead of worrying about immigration, we're worrying about emigration. I think the answer to that is partly that politicians do care. Of course, what they're interested in partly is to be re-elected. It's almost as basic as that. But you don't get re-elected if you completely ignore an important part of the electorate. I mean, it has been the case that politicians for years, particularly the Tories perhaps, were wooing older voters because they're more likely to turn out. Labour has to try and shift that around. I think house building is absolutely essential. I think work on renters' reforms is really important as well. But talking to young people and getting some of the younger ministers out there, some of the younger MPs to show a younger face of politics, I think is also crucial.
Sarah?
I think if you're still living in your children's bedroom, as it were, childhood bedroom at the age of 25, and you're laden with 30 grand, 40 grand, 50 grand's worth of student loan, I can completely understand why you think that politicians aren't worrying about you, because it does feel a bit bleak. It doesn't feel aspirational. It doesn't feel as though you're making the route that you want. So I can understand why young people are feeling that. I don't know what the answer is, because I do feel really sad for, my nieces who are 18, and they should be going off to university and having the experiences of being away from home. And my oldest niece has decided she's actually going to go and do an apprenticeship in the police, because she's like, I just can't see any value of going to university, coming out with loads of debt and not having a guarantee for a job. So I'm going to do my degree through the police. So she's kind of not necessarily limiting her options, but she's certainly taking herself on a different path than we expected.
I'd say that's actually a great option for her.
I'm sure it will be, but it's a shame that she can't just be like, I'm going to go and study whatever and have a wonderful time like you could 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, but I'd also say that, part of the problem is that we don't particularly think about people who don't go to university. There's half of young people that don't go to university, and often they don't have great career paths and they don't have the ability to learn skills and to then earn a wage that will allow them to start families and own homes. I mean, I feel terribly sorry for for this generation. I mean, my son is 19. He was born in 2005 at a time when, there was strong economic growth, when you could own your own house, when everything looked sort of, the sunny uplands were ahead. And, he's genuinely terrified there's going to be a nuclear war, that he's going to be conscripted. It is very bleak for young people out there. And I think part of the problem is
taking me back to my teenage years in the 1980s.
But we've got this kind of catch-22 situation where politicians have looked after older people rather than younger people. Younger people then don't vote because they've worked that out, that their interests are not being looked after. And then it just creates the cycle again that politicians don't look after their interests because they don't vote. So we need to break out of that.
Right, our fun question from Kay in Middlesbrough. John Cleese claims Fawlty Towers is funnier than any new comedy shows being shown these days. That's not a high bar, I don't think. And that's why he's turned it into a West End play. What other classic comedy shows would you like to see revived? Matt?
I'm on tour with John Cleese this summer, so come and see us on stage together. We're going around the country. I would like Fawlty Towers, amazing show. I would like to see Men Behaving Badly. That's the only other funny sitcom when I was growing up that I can think of.
Charlotte?
I literally can't think of another one. I mean, I did love Fawlty Towers when I watched it. I'm going to say that anything which is really silly is my kind of humour.
Bring back Benny Hill.
I mean, sure. Anything which is just kind of stupid, I'll take.
You have heard of Benny Hill, Christabel?
I have heard of Benny Hill.
The look on your face.
It was
I've
the look
heard, but never watched. I don't
just as well.
Okay.
Should we say it wouldn't make the screens today?
No, it
for all sorts of reasons.
All sorts of good reasons. Though I'm probably going to go for a quite politically incorrect one and say hello, hello.
Oh, I love that.
That's actually a really good show.
Yeah.
But
it's
you will
really
say
funny.
this only once.
Exactly.
Sarah?
I think I would go for something like "You rang, my lord," or "Are you being served?" Just something that's utterly camp and ridiculous.
Okay. I'm going to read out a text from Tricia who says, "Dear Ian, nice cross question. Pleasant, respectful, and no one talking over others in a ranty way. I always switch off when that happens, so congratulations, pal, on your collective performances tonight." On tomorrow's panel, we have the Liberal Democrat frontbencher, Dr Al Pinkerton, former Tory Minister Angela Knight, ex-Labour Party communications strategist Scarlett Maguire, and Max Anderson from the Conservative Environment Network campaign. But coming up in the next hour, in fact, I should have asked my panellists. In fact, I will do now. I don't know how many of you are married, and this is addressed to the women, but would you take your husband's surname? Christabel says no. Charlotte?
Don't know.
Don't know.
Absolutely
Sarah
not.
says
My first wife didn't. My wife now has.
Thank goodness for that. Well, that's what we're going to ask you, because more Gen Z women are rejecting the marital tradition than their millennial and boomer counterparts. 2/3 of women aged 18 to 34 would not take on their husband's name. Controversial. That's coming up next. 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player.
And attempting to kill 2 other people in a Christmas Day stabbing in Milton Keynes. Jaswell Brown killed 38-year-old Joanne Pearson and Tiana Grant, who was 24, at an address in Bletchley last year. The 49-year-old's lawyer says he's profoundly sorry for his actions. Andrew Tate's to face trial over allegations he subjected 4 women to sexual or physical abuse. It's thought to be the first time coercive control's been brought before a high court in a civil case. The controversial influencer denies the claims and says he'll defend himself vigorously. 4 journalists have been jailed by a Russian court over their links to the late opposition leader Alexei Navalny. They've been sentenced to 5.5 years each after being found guilty of working for